At my former mother-in-law's will, reading, my ex-husband walked in holding his mistress's baby like a trophy. He told me I didn't belong there. But when the attorney opened the folder, my name was the only one written. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. That single memory still feels like a stone pressed against my chest. It was a Thursday morning in Boston, the sky bruised with rain clouds that never seemed to tire. I sat in my car with the engine idling and the wipers moaning back and forth, smearing the storm rather than clearing it. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, staring at the droplets racing each other down the windshield. My reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, pale and drawn, the kind of face that knows too much about silence. I told myself I had come out of duty, not hope. Eleanor Carter had been more than my mother-in-law. She had been my anchor in every way that mattered when the ground beneath me shifted. She was the one who slid a cup of tea across the table when words refused to come. She was the one who told me in that calm, steady voice, "Rachel, quiet women often hold the heaviest truths." Even now I could almost hear her, a whisper threading through the storm. Still, I hesitated. My thumb lingered on the key, the thought flickering that I could drive away, vanish into the rain, let Ethan and Madison enjoy their performance without me. But then I remembered Eleanor's hand squeezing mine once in her sunroom when she said, "Do not let noise erase you." That memory rooted me. I switched off the engine. The silence was filled instantly with the percussion of rain. I opened the door and cold drops rushed inside like they had been waiting. My heels splashed into shallow puddles, the hem of my dress soaking through before I reached the steps. The stone staircase glistened dark as I climbed, each step heavier than the last. And there he was. Ethan stood beneath the overhang of the building, completely untouched by the weather. His navy suit was perfectly pressed, his shoes gleaming, his tie knotted just tight enough to signal control. He had always loved control more than love itself. Beside him was Madison. She was draped in a silk scarf, not a strand of hair out of place, her lipstick intact despite the humidity in the air. She cradled the newborn in her arms, a small bundle of innocence presented as a victory. She leaned into Ethan as though they were carved from one piece of marble. When our eyes met, Ethan's expression did not flicker. He only adjusted his stance, his voice smooth and flat. "You did not have to come, Rachel. You do not belong here." The words cut more sharply than the rain, but I did not let them draw blood. I looked at the child in Madison's arms, asleep, breathing softly. Once long ago, I had pictured a child with Ethan. That dream had died quietly long before our marriage did. Madison's smile spread with an almost theatrical sweetness. "Rachel, you look well," I answered with a single word. "Thanks, nothing more. No warmth, no invitation." I walked past them. Past Ethan's cologne that had not touched my skin in years. Past Madison's perfume, light and floral, a scent that had haunted my nights when Ethan came home late and evasive. I reached the glass doors and pulled them open. The weight of the door felt like the weight of crossing into another battlefield. Inside, the receptionist raised her eyes and gave a practiced nod. "You are here for the Carter estate." "Yes." My voice sounded steadier than my lungs felt. She handed me a clipboard. I signed my name, Rachel Carter, and for a moment I studied the ink. My name did not belong on the same page as his anymore, yet there it was. An assistant guided me down a quiet corridor. The hall smelled faintly of polished wood and old books, the kind of scent that makes you want to whisper. My heels echoed too loudly. I imagined Eleanor's presence, steady, unbothered. She had once told me, "Sometimes the people who erase you are the ones who fear you most." The memory clung to me as the door to the conference room opened. The room was designed to intimidate. Mahogany table, tall leather chairs, oak shelves heavy with books that looked more decorative than used. I slipped into a seat near the end, water still dripping from my coat. Across from me, Ethan sat with calculated ease, ankle resting on knee, fingers tapping, as though even here he orchestrated the rhythm. Madison placed herself beside him, radiant and smug, bouncing the child with exaggerated gentleness. She spoke first. Rachel, Eleanor, and I had long talks near the end. She often spoke about the future. I tilted my head, keeping my voice even. "Did she ever say she wanted to see me?" Madison faltered. "Not exactly." Her eyes darted toward Ethan. Ethan's jaw tightened. Let us not make this uncomfortable. We are here to honor my mother's wishes. Funny, I replied. I thought I was here because she had something to say. The tension crackled. Ethan's fingers twitched against the table the same way they used to when he was irritated but trying to appear calm. The door opened again. Harold Kent, the attorney, entered with a weathered briefcase and an expression that was both kind and unyielding. He took his seat at the head of the table and spread open the folder before him. His gaze moved over each of us in turn. When his eyes reached me, they paused slightly. Not pity, recognition. We are here today for the formal reading of the last will of Eleanor Marie Carter, he began. Present are her son, Mr. Ethan Carter, his partner Ms. Madison Hayes, and Mrs. Rachel Carter. Mrs. Rachel Carter, whole, undiluted. The word echoed in the silence, filling spaces I had not realized were empty. Madison leaned forward, her smile sharp at the edges. Mr. Kent, just to be clear, Eleanor did not leave any surprises correct. Everything goes to Ethan. Mr. Kent's voice was smooth as glass. All details will be addressed in the formal reading, Ms. Hayes. The silence that followed was worse than hostility. It was dismissive. Ethan checked his watch. Madison shifted the blanket around the baby for the third time, her hand brushing Ethan's sleeve like punctuation. I folded my hands and waited. Mr. Kent turned the first page of the will, the sound of paper crisp and deliberate. But then he closed the folder again and looked at us with measured calm. There is something you should know before I proceed. Mrs. Carter left behind a sealed letter. She instructed that it be read aloud in this room, but only after the will has been fully disclosed. Madison stiffened, her lips parting slightly. Ethan's jaw locked, the muscle in his temple twitching. I followed Mr. Kent's hand as he set aside a cream-colored envelope. My name was written on it in Eleanor's familiar script. Not Mrs., not daughter-in-law, just Rachel. For a moment, the rain outside battered harder against the tall windows, as if the storm itself wanted to press closer. I could feel my own breath slow steadying. Because in that instant, I understood. Whatever noise Ethan and Madison would make in the hours to come, Eleanor had chosen to leave me her silence. And in that silence, she had left me her truth. The envelope on the table glowed in my mind long after Mr. Kent mentioned it. Cream-colored. My name is in Eleanor's handwriting. Just Rachel. While Ethan's fingers twitched and Madison's smile cracked, my mind slipped somewhere else, somewhere warmer. The rain outside became the soft patter against the glass walls of Eleanor's sunroom, the place where she and I had built a kind of unspoken language. I remembered the first time I visited her alone. Ethan had canceled dinner again, another late meeting, another excuse that felt thin. I drove through pouring rain and ended up at her house without calling ahead. My coat was soaked, my mascara streaked. She opened the door before I could knock twice, pressing a towel into my hands without a word. You deserve more than waiting rooms and empty apologies, she told me that night. I had tried to laugh it off, but something in her gaze rooted me. We ate grilled cheese sandwiches on her old china plates and watched a documentary about glaciers. At one point, she leaned back, eyes half closed, and said, "The thing about glaciers, Rachel, is they move so slowly, no one notices until the whole landscape has changed." I had not understood then. I do now. She had been shifting something inside me even as Ethan chipped away at my confidence. Back in the conference room, the tick of the clock sounded louder. I breathed and let the memory settle before it crushed me. Madison's whispering to Ethan pulled me back. She wanted us closer at the end, Madison said quickly, almost defensively. Ethan's voice was low but sharp. Do not speculate. Mr. Kent lifted a hand, silencing them without words. His control reminded me of Eleanor's own quiet authority. She never raised her voice, but you heard her. Another memory unfurled. It was spring lilacs, thick in the air, when she invited me to help organize her bookshelves. Her nails were always neat, bare of polish, perfectly rounded. She handed me a stack of novels and said with a smirk, "People think silence means disapproval. I have always believed it makes room for truth." I asked her then, "And what does it mean when someone cannot stop talking?" She placed another book in my arms and answered without hesitation, "It usually means they are hiding something." Only later did I realize she was speaking about Ethan. His endless charm, his polished speeches at fundraisers, his smooth small talk. Behind closed doors there was only absence. The memory dissolved into the heavy air of the present. Madison adjusted the baby again, rocking him a little too visibly, as if the performance could make up for the cracks forming in her composure. Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the folder, his jaw hard. I glanced again at the envelope. For reasons I could not name, my chest tightened. That letter would speak in ways I was not prepared for, and yet I needed it. The attorney resumed reading. His voice fell into the rhythm of legal phrasing, assets and clauses sliding past me like a language meant to dull human edges. I barely registered the words. My mind wandered back to Eleanor's kitchen sunlight spilling through lace curtains as she poured steaming water over chamomile. You do not need to be loud to be powerful, Rachel, she once told me. Quiet women carry truths men pretend not to hear. It had sounded like comfort back then. Now it sounded like prophecy. The shift from memory to present came suddenly, with Madison's voice breaking the drone of the reading. So this is just formalities, she said, trying to reclaim control. Eleanor made her wishes clear. Everything goes to Ethan. Mr. Kent's pause was slight but devastating. Nothing in this room is a formality, Ms. Hayes. Silence fell again, thicker this time. I saw Ethan's eyes flicker just briefly toward me. That tiny motion was a twist in itself, a crack in his polished surface. For the first time, I wondered if he feared what was coming. I let the silence stretch, then leaned back and folded my hands. She always planned carefully, I said softly, more to myself than to them. She never wasted words. The truth of that statement lingered in the room. Madison's smile faltered. Ethan's tapping fingers stilled. Mr. Kent adjusted his glasses and turned another page. I heard only fragments, stocks, property, antiques, but the words dissolved into noise. My mind was in Eleanor's garden, kneeling beside her as she pressed seeds into the soil. Patience is underrated, she had murmured. Everything looks dead before it grows. That was Eleanor. Never dramatic, never loud, but she always left you with a line that rooted itself deeper than you realized. The pacing of the room slowed again. Rain softened on the windows. The air carried the weight of anticipation rather than movement. I knew we were drifting towards something inevitable. Madison cleared her throat. Rachel had not even seen her for weeks, she blurted. She was not involved in the end. I met her gaze calm. Eleanor saw me enough. The words landed like a pebble dropped into water. Small, but the ripples spread. Ethan shifted in his chair. You are twisting this, he said, his voice taut. No, I replied evenly. I am remembering. The exchange ended there. Mr. Kent's steady voice resumed the legalities, flowing over us again. But the tension had shifted. No one believed this was routine anymore. The promise of that sealed letter hung above us like thunder waiting to break. And for the first time since stepping into the storm that morning, I felt not erased, but seen. The steady murmur of Mr. Kent's voice blurred again into the hum of rain on the windows. Words like estate and asset and valuation drifted past as if they belonged to another world. My attention was locked on the envelope beside the folder. It sat like a quiet sentinel waiting its turn. I realized Ethan was no longer leaning casually. His hands had tightened on the arms of his chair, knuckles paling. Madison, once radiant, now shifted uneasily, bouncing the baby with more force than comfort. The performance was fraying. Mr. Kent paused to clear his throat. In that brief silence, I spoke without raising my voice. Eleanor once told me that people who shout the loudest usually have the most to hide. The words fell softly, but they rippled. Ethan's eyes snapped to mine. Madison stiffened. What are you implying? Ethan asked, his tone controlled but sharp around the edges. Nothing, I said evenly, only remembering. The baby stirred, let out a faint cry, and Madison rushed to hush him. The sound filled the heavy room, and in that fragile moment, Ethan's facade cracked. He leaned toward Mr. Kent, voice low but urgent. She was not of sound mind at the end. You should consider that before reading anything further. Mr. Kent's expression did not shift. Mrs. Carter updated her will 6 weeks before her passing, witnessed and notarized. I assure you her mind was sound. Mind. A silence deeper than before fell. Ethan reclined again, but the movement looked forced, as though he were staging himself for an audience that no longer believed him. I let the silence stretch, then dropped my gaze to the polished surface of the table. My reflection stared back at me, tired but steady. That was when another memory rose unbidden. It was late summer, the air heavy with heat. I had stopped by Eleanor's house to return a scarf she had lent me. She sat on the porch with a notebook in her lap, pen poised. I asked what she was writing. She smiled faintly and said, "Sometimes the hardest truths are easier to put on paper than to speak out loud." That memory tugged at me now as I stared at the sealed envelope. She had prepared for this moment, knowing her voice would carry weight when mine might be dismissed. The present pressed back in as Madison whispered to Ethan. Her words were too low to catch, but her urgency was obvious. He shook his head, jaw clenched. Mr. Kent's calm voice broke through. "We will continue." I leaned back, my heartbeat steadying with a strange clarity. I could feel something shifting. For the first time, Ethan seemed uncertain and Madison's composure was slipping. Mr. Kent listed a property, an account, and another clause. Each one sounded less like numbers and more like stones being stacked. I kept my eyes on the letter, knowing it would topple everything when the time came. I remembered another night at Eleanor's. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and she poured me tea without asking. She had studied me quietly before saying, "You carry the weight of other people's comfort. One day someone must carry yours." At the time, I thought she meant kindness. Now I wondered if she meant this exact moment when she had arranged for me to be seen despite the noise around me. The baby whimpered again. Madison rocked him furiously, her smile returning like a mask. "Eleanor trusted me," she said, suddenly forcing brightness. "She told me often." I raised an eyebrow. "Did she write it down?" Madison's lips parted, but no answer came. Mr. Kent closed the folder gently. "We are nearing the conclusion. Once I finish, I will read the letter Eleanor requested be shared." The words landed like a warning bell. Ethan shifted in his seat. His carefully curated calm had turned to stillness, but it was the stillness of a man bracing for impact. I felt my breath deepen slow, as though my body recognized the rhythm of a tide about to turn. The rain outside softened, becoming a hush against the glass. The storm was not over, only catching its breath. I glanced once more at the envelope. Eleanor's script seemed to lean forward, ready to speak. And in that instant, I knew the reckoning had only just begun. The air inside that room was thick, as if the storm outside had seeped through the windows and settled over us. Mr. Kent's calm tone carried on, but underneath it something sharp was taking form. Every word he read was another thread pulling apart the illusion Ethan and Madison had wrapped themselves in. I watched Ethan's face. For years I had studied those expressions, the faint twitch of his jaw, the way his eyes hardened when he wanted to appear collected. But this was different. His stillness was no longer commanded. It was dread. Mr. Kent turned another page. His voice was steady. "To my son, Ethan Carter, I leave the portrait of his late father currently displayed in my study." The words dropped into the room like stones. Silence followed. Not confusion, not disbelief, but something colder. Madison shifted first. "Is that all?" Her voice trembled despite the brightness she tried to force. Mr. Kent's eyes did not flicker. "That is what the will specifies for your partner, Ms. Hayes. We will continue." I looked at Ethan. He did not move. His fingers tapped once against the table, then stopped, as if even that betrayed too much. Madison clutched the baby tighter. Her voice grew sharper. Eleanor must have been confused. She would never leave her own son with only a portrait. I leaned forward slightly, my voice quiet but clear. She was not confused. The statement hung there, a blade laid carefully between us. Ethan's gaze snapped toward me, but he said nothing. Mr. Kent continued. "To Ms. Madison Hayes, no specific bequest is made." This time the silence fractured. Madison let out a breath that was half laugh, half protest. "That cannot be right. She welcomed me. She told me I was part of the family," I answered with calm precision. "Welcoming is not the same as trusting." The baby stirred again, whimpering, as though even he could feel the tremor under Madison's words. She rocked him harder, her smile falling apart. Ethan finally spoke, his voice clipped. "Read the rest." Mr. Kent adjusted his glasses. "Yes, we will proceed." He turned to the final section, his tone deliberate. "To Rachel Carter, I leave the remainder of my estate in its entirety." For a moment I heard nothing but the hum of traffic far beyond the windows and the relentless pound of my heartbeat. Entirety. The house on Beacon Street, the cottage by the lake, the accounts, the heirlooms, the little things only Eleanor and I would understand. Ethan's chair creaked violently as he leaned forward. His face was pale disbelief cutting through his features. "This must be a mistake." Mr. Kent's reply was immediate. "There is no mistake." The will was updated 6 weeks before Eleanor's passing and signed before witnesses. I hold the certification if you wish to review it. Madison's voice cracked as she looked from him to me. No. She would never give everything to someone who is not even family anymore. Her words stung not because they were true, but because of how easily she tried to erase me. I steadied myself and answered evenly. I was never just a daughter-in-law to her. She made that clear long before today. Ethan's hand clenched into a fist against the table. You had not even seen her for weeks before she died. This cannot stand. I met his eyes without flinching. She had already seen enough. Mr. Kent cleared his throat with practiced calm. There is a contingency clause. Should Mrs. Carter decline the inheritance, the estate will be transferred to the Willowbrook Literacy Foundation, Eleanor's chosen charity. She accounted for every possibility. The name of that small-town charity hit me with a jolt of memory. Eleanor had once told me she dreamed of leaving a legacy for children who could not afford books. She had planned this carefully. Ethan slumped back, anger simmering under the surface. Madison's face had gone tight, her lips pressed thin as if words might betray her. I breathed slowly, grounding myself. This was the moment Eleanor had prepared me for. Her letter still waited, silent and patient, promising to cut through the last of their denial. Madison finally broke the stillness, her voice rising. You told me she was putting everything in your name. You promised we would be secure. Ethan glared at her, but the silence between them said more than words. The alliance that had once seemed unshakable was already fracturing. I stayed quiet, watching. Sometimes silence is not absence. Sometimes it is a strategy. Mr. Kent closed the folder, gently folding his hands on top. We have concluded the formal reading. The letter remains. The envelope sat between us, cream paper catching the lamplight. My name is written in Eleanor's neat slant, just Rachel. For years, Ethan had told me I was invisible noise in the background of his polished life. But in this room, on this paper, my name was the only one that mattered. I did not smile. I simply breathed. And in that breath, I felt something shift irrevocably. The room was still trembling from the weight of the words. Ethan's jaw clenched tight, Madison gripping the baby, as if his presence might reverse what had been spoken. Mr. Kent folded the will neatly back into the folder, his calm presence a quiet finality. But my attention was fixed on the envelope. The letter was waiting. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Madison stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the carpet. Her voice was brittle. This cannot be right. She must have been pressured. She would never do this. Ethan did not answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the table, the mask slipping into something raw or almost hollow. Mr. Kent cleared his throat. The letter will clarify Mrs. Carter's wishes further. We will read it now if you are prepared. Ethan's voice broke the silence. I want time. This is not, I cut in softly. You want to delay because you already know what it will say. His eyes flashed at me, but he did not respond. Mr. Kent lifted the envelope but paused. If it would serve clarity, perhaps we could take a recess. Let the room breathe. That was when I realized my own breath had been shallow. I nodded. A short break. The moment I stepped into the hallway, the air changed. It was still heavy with rain, but less suffocating than the room we had left. My heels clicked against the tiles, each step echoing. I passed a tall window and stopped. Outside, the storm had softened into a mist, the kind of rain that blurred edges rather than battered them. I pressed my palm lightly against the glass and closed my eyes. And suddenly, I was not in the law office. I was back in Eleanor's garden on a gray afternoon when she had handed me a basket of herbs. The world will always try to tell you what belongs to you, she had said. But the only thing that truly belongs is what you choose to carry. Her words came rushing back now, weaving into the fabric of this day. The sound of footsteps drew me from the memory. I turned to see Mr. Kent approaching quietly. He adjusted his glasses and spoke low. Rachel Eleanor trusted you. She made her intentions unmistakable. I met his gaze. She saw what they became. She always did. He hesitated. Do you want support? You should not carry this alone. Eleanor asked me to ensure you had every resource you might need. The words lingered. Not carry this alone. A memory stirred of someone else, someone I had not spoken to in years. It was my friend Grace, a woman who had once been like a sister. She and I had met in graduate school, both of us trying to navigate a world that dismissed quiet ambition. Grace had been there during the early years of my marriage, before distance and circumstance pulled us apart. She had seen the way Ethan silenced me, though she never said it out loud. In that hallway, her name surfaced in my mind like a lifeline. I answered Mr. Kent softly. There is someone I need to reach out to. He nodded as though he had expected that. Good. Because what comes next will test you. The echo of his words followed me as I returned briefly to the room. Ethan and Madison sat apart now, tension strung between them. The baby whimpered. Madison rocked him with jerky movements, her eyes sharp with unspoken accusation. Ethan kept staring at the folder as if he could will it to change. I said nothing. Sometimes silence is sharper than any retort. The recess ended, but before the letter could be opened, Ethan insisted on a postponement until the afternoon. Mr. Kent, calm as always, allowed it. That was how I found myself stepping back into the rain-soaked city streets, the letter still unopened, but the truth already shifting the ground beneath us. I walked slowly, the air cool against my skin. Each step carried me further from the oppressive weight of that mahogany room and closer to something I had almost forgotten: choice. By the time I reached my apartment, I already knew what I would do. I pulled out my phone, fingers hesitating only briefly before pressing the contact that had been dormant for years. The call rang once, twice, then clicked. Rachel Grace's voice carried both surprise and warmth. A breath left me. I had not realized I was holding. I need to see you. There was no hesitation on her end. Tell me where. That evening, we met in a quiet cafe tucked on the corner of Charles Street. The place smelled of roasted beans and rain-damp coats. Grace looked almost unchanged, her dark hair tied back loosely, eyes sharp but kind. When she saw me, she stood and embraced me without a word. We sat by the window, mugs warming our hands. For a moment, neither of us spoke, letting the silence fill with recognition. Finally, Grace leaned in. You do not have to explain. I read between the lines years ago, but I see it on your face now. Something broke. I nodded slowly. Eleanor left everything to me. Her eyebrows rose, but she did not look shocked, only thoughtful. Because she trusted you. I lowered my voice. Ethan is unraveling. Madison is furious. And there is a letter we have not read yet. I know it will tear the rest of the mask away. Grace studied me. Then you cannot face this alone. I will stand with you. A weight shifted off my chest. I had forgotten what it felt like to be believed without question. The cafe's hum faded as we spoke quietly about next steps. Grace reminded me of the woman I had been before silence became my armor. She told me this is not about what they lose, it is about what you finally claim. Her words pierced through the fog. She was right. This was never about revenge, it was about being chosen, not erased. When I left the cafe that night, the rain had stopped. The streetlights glistened on wet pavement, reflections stretching like threads of possibility. Grace walked beside me until we reached the corner, then squeezed my hand firmly. Whatever comes when that letter is read, remember you are not alone in the room anymore. I walked home with her words echoing through me, alone yet not lonely, seen even before the envelope had been opened. And as I set my keys down on the counter and shed my damp coat, I knew something vital had already shifted. The cracks in Ethan's control were widening, Madison's certainty was dissolving, and Eleanor's final words were waiting like a tide just beyond the shore. For the first time in years, I felt steady, because tomorrow the letter would speak. That night I barely slept. The city outside my window was quiet, but my thoughts roared like the storm had followed me home. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that envelope resting on the mahogany table, my name written in Eleanor's hand. Tomorrow it would be read, but tonight I could not shake the feeling that I had to prepare. When dawn came, I rose before the alarm. I brewed coffee but barely tasted it. My phone buzzed with a message from Grace. It was simple. I am with you today, whatever you need. Her words steadied me. I thought of Eleanor again, of her calm way of making decisions long before anyone else knew a decision was necessary. If she had planned for this, I needed to do the same. By mid-morning, I was sitting in Mr. Kent's office, a smaller room than the one where the will had been read. Books lined the walls, their spines worn with use rather than display. He closed the door gently and gestured for me to sit. Rachel, he said, his voice measured, Eleanor trusted you with more than property. She entrusted you with her truth. That letter will make things plain, but you should also understand the legal ground beneath you. They may attempt to contest. I folded my hands on the desk. Ethan already hinted she was not of sound mind. He will push that as far as he can. Mr. Kent nodded. And we will be ready. I have certified witnesses. Doctors' statements of her clarity. She left nothing undone. But I want you to see something. He unlocked a drawer and drew out a small, leather-bound notebook. He placed it gently on the desk between us. She asked me to keep this safe. Notes she wrote in her final months. It is not part of the will, but it records her state of mind. I opened it with careful hands. Inside were pages of her familiar handwriting, crisp and steady. Small reflections, observations of her garden, notes about the charity in Willowbrook, even reminders for groceries, all precise, all coherent. My throat tightened. She had prepared even for this attack on her dignity. Mr. Kent's eyes softened. If they claim confusion, these pages will silence them. But Rachel, she also wrote of you, not in legal terms, in human ones. I flipped to a page dated weeks before she died. The words blurred slightly through my tears. Rachel carries herself with grace even in silence. I want her to be free of erasure. I trust her with what remains. I closed the book carefully, pressing my palm over the cover as if to absorb her steadiness. I whispered, she knew. Mr. Kent nodded, she always knew. I left his office with the notebook tucked securely in my bag. Outside, the rain had lifted, leaving the streets shining as if freshly washed. I called Grace as I walked. She answered immediately. Where are you? Leaving Kent's office. I have something of Eleanor's. Notes. Proof. Bring it to me. We should go through it together. We met at her apartment, overlooking the river. The space smelled faintly of lavender and old books. She cleared the table and we laid the notebook open under the light. Together we read passages aloud, Eleanor's voice echoing through her tidy script. Grace looked up after a long silence. Rachel, she left you more than evidence. She left you a map. Look here. She pointed to a line near the bottom of a page. Check bank box Willowbrook. I leaned closer. The words were underlined twice. My pulse quickened. Do you think she left documents there? I asked. Grace's smile was small but fierce. I think she wanted you to find them. By afternoon, we were on the road. The drive north took us past stretches of trees just beginning to turn with autumn. The sky was a pale blue, the kind that feels like a reprieve after storms. At the Willowbrook Bank, the manager recognized Eleanor's name instantly. After a few phone calls and signatures, the steel door opened and a small safe deposit box was set before me. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside were 2 envelopes and a flash drive. One envelope bore my name again, the same slanted handwriting. The other was labeled simply, "For Counsel." I placed them back carefully, deciding not to open mine until later when I was alone. Grace touched my arm. Do you see now? She thought of everything. She knew they would fight. She left you what you need to hold ground. Driving back to the city, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The fear had not vanished, but it had shape now. It could be faced. That evening, Grace spread documents across her dining table, the legal envelope for Mr. Kent, the flash drive waiting for us to explore. Inside, we found copies of investments, letters of instruction, and a video recording. Eleanor appeared on the screen, seated in her sunroom, with a shawl around her shoulders. Her voice was steady. If you are watching this, then I am gone. I want my words to be clear. I chose Rachel not to wound my son, but to honor what is true. She has carried a weight no one else saw. She deserves to begin again. Grace pressed pause, her eyes glistening. Rachel, you realize what this means. Even if they try to twist the narrative, Eleanor herself has left the counterpoint. I sat back, the hum of the video still in the room. My chest ached with both grief and gratitude. I whispered. She gave me a weapon, but it feels more like a shield. Grace squeezed my hand. Then carry it. Tomorrow when that letter is read, you will not stand defenseless. The night deepened outside the windows. I gathered the notebook and the envelopes, tucking them back into my bag. For the first time in days, my shoulders lowered, the tension loosening just enough to breathe fully. As I walked home, the city lights reflected on wet pavement, and I felt Eleanor's presence like a steady hand at my back. She had armed me with her words, her clarity, her unwavering trust. Whatever storm awaited in that mahogany room, I was no longer the woman who walked in unsure of her place. I was Rachel, chosen, prepared, and no longer afraid of their noise. The following morning, the air felt heavier than the sky itself. I walked back into the law office with the notebook and the sealed envelopes in my bag, the weight of them pressing against me like armor. Grace had promised to wait outside if I needed her. I carried her presence with me as much as Eleanor's. Inside the conference room, Ethan was already there, his suit flawless but his face strained. Madison sat beside him, the baby restless in her arms. Their eyes flicked toward me as I entered, sharp and searching. I felt their judgment pressing against my skin, but it did not pierce. Mr. Kent set the folder on the table once more. "We are reconvened to continue with Mrs. Carter's instructions," he said calmly. Before he could continue, Ethan leaned forward, his voice clipped. "I will be contesting this will. My mother was not capable of making such sweeping decisions. Rachel took advantage of her isolation." The accusation hung in the room, bitter as iron. I met his gaze steadily. Eleanor was not isolated. She chose her company carefully. That is a distinction you never understood. His jaw flexed, but Madison was quicker. "You think inheriting property makes you powerful. It makes you a thief of what rightfully belongs to this family." I folded my hands. "She was my family, she said it herself." Madison's mouth opened, then shut. The silence that followed was louder than any retort. Mr. Kent cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, Ms. Hayes, the will is legally binding. If you proceed with contestation, you will need evidence. Speculation will not suffice." And Ethan's voice tightened. "I have witnesses who will attest to her decline." I reached into my bag, placed the leather-bound notebook on the table, and slid it toward Mr. Kent. "Then we should all look at what Eleanor left behind. Notes in her own hand, dates, observations, entirely coherent." Ethan's hand twitched as though he wanted to snatch it away, but he did not move. Madison leaned over his shoulder, eyes darting across the page Mr. Kent opened. Her color drained slightly. She wrote about her garden, Mr. Kent narrated softly. Her charity plans. And about Rachel. He paused, letting the words settle. Ethan's fist slammed against the arm of his chair. "You cannot know when those were written." Mr. Kent adjusted his glasses. "I do. They were dated, signed, and some pages were witnessed by her nurse. Mr. Carter, this will not aid your case." The baby cried sharply then, as if echoing the fracture in the room. Madison rocked him hastily, her movements jerky, betraying the storm within her. I let the sound wash over me, then spoke evenly. "You called me nothing. You said I did not belong. But the ink in her hand says otherwise, and it will speak louder than all of this noise." Ethan glared, his composure thinning. "Do not get comfortable. I will find a way to expose you." I did not raise my voice. "You cannot expose what does not exist, but you have already revealed yourself." The words struck deeper than I expected. He leaned back sharply, his eyes narrowing. For the first time I saw not control, but desperation. Mr. Kent interjected, his tone firm. "We will now proceed to the letter as instructed by Mrs. Carter. That is the final word on this matter." The envelope lay untouched on the table, cream paper catching the lamplight. My name written across the front seemed to glow against the dark wood. Ethan spoke quickly. "Not yet. I want to review it before it is read aloud." Mr. Kent shook his head. Her instructions were explicit. It must be read in the presence of all parties, no exceptions. Madison's composure cracked further. "This is humiliation. She knew about us, she despised us, and now you want to let her voice shame us even in death." I looked directly at her. "Truth is not humiliation. It is only unbearable if you built your life on lies." Her cheeks flushed with anger, but she had no answer. The baby whimpered again, as if punctuating the silence that followed. For a moment the room felt suspended. Every sound amplified: the ticking of the clock, the faint patter of rain returning against the windows, the shuffle of papers as Mr. Kent prepared the letter. In that fragile space, a realization settled over me. Ethan and Madison had arrived certain of triumph, sure that money and legacy would bow to them. But now their certainty was unraveling thread by thread. Their first strike had been meant to intimidate me. Instead, it revealed their fear. I breathed in slowly, steadying myself for what was to come. Eleanor had always told me silence could be more powerful than noise. Today her silence was about to end. The storm outside thickened, lightning flashing faintly against the glass. The envelope waited, patient, inevitable. And I knew the first cracks of their downfall had already begun to show. The envelope sat between us like a silent judge. The cream paper looked fragile, but the weight of what was inside pressed harder than any storm outside. Mr. Kent's hand hovered above it. Mrs. Carter's final instruction, he said, was that this letter be read aloud in the presence of everyone here. The words cracked the air like thunder. Ethan leaned forward quickly. If this letter contains slander, it should not stand as evidence of anything. Mr. Kent adjusted his glasses unshaken. It is not evidence in a legal sense. It is testimony of her intent. And it will be honored. Madison shifted, clutching the baby closer. Her voice was brittle. She never liked me. This is just another way of punishing us. I looked at her evenly. She did not write to punish, she wrote to reveal. The silence that followed was pierced only by the ticking clock. Then Mr. Kent broke the seal. The crack of paper split the tension like lightning. He unfolded the letter carefully and began to read. To my dearest Rachel, if you are hearing this, then I am already gone. I want you to know that you were never just the wife of my son. You were family in the truest sense. I saw your dignity, your restraint, the way you carried silence not as weakness, but as strength. My breath caught. The sound of her words through his voice filled the room like a presence. I know about the betrayal, the letter continued. I know about the long nights when you were left alone, the silence you endured, and the weight you bore without complaint. I want you to understand that I chose you not to wound Ethan, but to honor what you never demanded. Integrity, compassion, loyalty. Madison let out a sharp breath. Ethan's face tightened, his jaw a hard line. Mr. Kent kept reading. I raised my son to value honesty, but somewhere he traded it for control. That choice broke my heart, but I could not protect the version of him I once believed in. He became someone I no longer recognized, and so I had to choose differently. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words sink deep. Eleanor had seen what I thought had gone unnoticed. You deserve a chance, Rachel, her letter went on. Not because of what you lost, but because of what you carried with grace. My estate is yours not as a reward, but as a key. Use it to build a life that belongs only to you. Live it freely, loudly, or quietly, but on your own terms. Mr. Kent's voice softened at the end. With love always, Eleanor. The silence afterward was absolute. Even the storm outside seemed to pause as if listening. Ethan was the first to break. His voice was raw. This is manipulation. She was misled. Mr. Kent folded the letter and placed it back on the table. Her handwriting, her signature, her will. Nothing about this was coerced. I spoke slowly, each word deliberate. She saw you clearly, Ethan. That is what you cannot accept. His eyes burned into me. You think this makes you righteous? It makes you naive. You will not hold this alone. I will challenge every word. I met his gaze. You already tried. She left proof you cannot erase. Madison shifted suddenly, her voice rising. She despised me. She wrote this just to cut me out. She never wanted me here. I turned toward her steady. Respect is not despising. She simply refused to mistake appearances for truth. The baby whimpered in her arms and she rocked him too quickly, her composure unraveling in plain sight. Mr. Kent leaned forward, his tone calm but resolute. The reading is complete. The instructions have been fulfilled. The estate belongs to Rachel Carter in accordance with the will. The words closed over the room like a verdict. For a moment, Ethan looked smaller than I had ever seen him. His shoulders hunched, his mouth set but trembling. He whispered almost to himself, "She was my mother." I answered softly, "Yes, and she chose to see what you became." The blow landed. He flinched slightly, then slumped back in his chair. Madison rose abruptly, clutching the baby like a shield. "I cannot sit here any longer," she said sharply. She stormed toward the door, her heels striking the carpet with clipped violence. The sound faded into the hall, leaving only the hush of the storm returning outside. Ethan stayed seated, eyes on the table, lost in a silence he could not control. I looked at the folded letter before me, its edges neat, its voice lingering. Eleanor had spoken her last truth, and it was mine to carry. The tension broke slowly like the air after thunder. Mr. Kent gathered the folder, his movements precise. "This concludes our duty here today. Rachel, my office will be in touch to finalize the transfer of documents." I nodded, unable to trust my voice yet. When I finally rose from the chair, the floor beneath me felt steadier than it had in years. As I stepped into the hallway, the storm met me with a rush of cool air. Grace was waiting by the window, her eyes searching mine. I simply nodded and she understood. Together we walked out of the building. The rain had eased into a drizzle, the kind that softened edges and made the city glow. I breathed deeply, the air damp and clean. For the first time in years, I was not waiting for someone else to choose me. The choice had already been made, and tomorrow the world would begin to shift. When Grace and I stepped out of the law office, drizzle hung in the air like a veil. For a few breaths, I thought the storm had passed, but I was wrong. The real storm was waiting. That evening, as twilight settled over the city, I received a call. The number flashed familiar, one I once knew as home. My pulse quickened, but I answered. Ethan's voice poured through the line, sharp and uneven. "You think this is finished? You think a letter makes you untouchable?" I stayed silent. His breathing was heavy, as if he had been pacing. "You manipulated her," he pressed. "She was old sick, and you took advantage. I will drag you through court until every cent is drained." I let his fury wash over me before replying calmly. "Eleanor prepared for you. She left notes, witnesses, and even recordings. The only thing exposed in court will be your own choices." The line went quiet for a moment. Then he spat, "You do not deserve what is mine." "It was never yours," I answered softly. Then I ended the call. I stood by the window, watching lights flicker on across the city. My reflection looked back at me, not timid, not erased, but steady. Grace's words echoed in my mind. "This is not about what they lose. It is about what you finally claim." The next day confirmed it. Ethan arrived at Mr. Kent's office unannounced, demanding another meeting. I was there with Grace when the receptionist, flustered, led him in. His suit was immaculate, but his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. Madison was absent. He strode to the table, ignoring formalities. "I will not let her destroy my legacy," he said, jabbing a finger toward me. Mr. Kent's tone was even. "Your mother's will is valid. Contestation will only waste resources you do not have." Ethan slammed his hand against the folder. "She was manipulated. I will prove it." I met his glare without blinking. "You will prove only what everyone already knows, that you cannot accept being seen for what you became." His composure cracked further. "Do not act superior. You lived off me for years. Now you think inheriting money makes you noble." Grace leaned forward, her voice cool. "She is not acting. She is simply no longer afraid of you." The silence that followed was thick. Ethan's jaw worked furiously, but his words faltered. His desperation was laid bare in front of us all. Mr. Kent placed his hands calmly on the table. "Mr. Carter, I must remind you that intimidation here serves no purpose. If you continue, I will have no choice but to involve the court preemptively." Ethan's chest rose and fell quickly. Then, in a twist I had not expected, he muttered, "The business is failing. The accounts are empty. She knew, and she chose to humiliate me." The confession slipped out before he could stop it. His eyes widened slightly as he realized what he had admitted. Grace and I exchanged a look. This was the weakness Eleanor had anticipated. He had built his life on the illusion of success, and now even that illusion was crumbling. I said quietly, "Eleanor did not humiliate you. You did that to yourself." He froze, the weight of my words pulling his shoulders down. Madison's absence suddenly made sense. She had seen the cracks too. Mr. Kent exhaled slowly. "I suggest you take time, Mr. Carter. Reflect on whether exposing yourself further in court is worth what little you have left." Ethan stared at me one last time, but the fire in his eyes was no longer powerful. It was a defeat smoldering into ash. Without another word, he turned and left, the door closing with a hollow thud. The room exhaled with him gone. Grace reached across the table, her hand steady over mine. "You saw it. He has nothing left to fight with but anger." I nodded, and anger cannot undo truth. That night I walked alone through the city streets. The rain had cleared, leaving puddles that mirrored the glow of neon signs. Each step splashed softly, grounding me in a world that suddenly felt open again. I thought of Eleanor, of her steady voice in that video we had found. She had said I deserved a life entirely my own. I realized then that this was more than inheritance, it was liberation. When I reached my apartment, I placed her letter on the table. I read it again in the quiet, the words washing over me like a tide. Not a reward, but a key. Build a life that belongs only to you. For the first time, I let myself believe her. The storm of Ethan's anger had tried to shake me, but all it did was reveal the fragility of his foundation. And in that revelation, I found strength. I turned off the lights, the city glowing beyond my window. The night no longer felt heavy. It felt like the beginning of something unbroken. The night after Ethan stormed out of Mr. Kent's office, I felt the silence in my apartment differently. For years, silence had meant loneliness, an echo of absence. But now it felt like clarity. The storm had finally burned itself out, leaving only stillness. The next morning, sunlight stretched through the curtains, pale but warm. I made tea chamomile the way Eleanor liked it and let the steam rise around me. I realized I was no longer waiting for another shoe to drop. Ethan had played his last card, and it had dissolved in his own confession. Still, I knew closure did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces. That afternoon, I met with Mr. Kent one final time to sign documents transferring the estate. His office smelled faintly of leather and dust, but it carried no intimidation now. He placed the papers in front of me. "This makes it official," he said gently. I signed my name slowly, deliberately. With each stroke of the pen, I felt years of erasure fade away. When it was done, Mr. Kent closed the folder. "Eleanor would be proud of how you carried yourself," I whispered. She gave me the strength to do it. Walking out into the afternoon light, I did not look back. In the days that followed, I began sorting through the Beacon Street house. The rooms were heavy with history, but they no longer felt like prisons. Grace helped me pack the pieces I wanted to keep: books, photographs, and recipes written in Eleanor's hand. The rest I arranged to sell, the proceeds already marked in my mind for something new. As I moved through those rooms, memories surfaced. Laughter in the sunroom evenings when Eleanor and I watched the world through rain-streaked glass. I let the memories come, but they no longer hurt. They felt like roots grounding me, even as I prepared to step into new soil. One evening, as I boxed the last of the china, the phone rang. The caller ID showed Ethan again. Against my better judgment, I answered. His voice was tired, stripped of anger. "Rachel, I have nothing left. The business is gone. Madison left. Even my son is not mine to see. I do not know who I am without all of it." I held the phone in silence for a moment. Once those words would have broken me. Now they only confirmed what Eleanor had written. "You are the sum of your choices," I said quietly. "You have to live with them. I no longer do." He murmured something I could not catch, then the line went dead. I set the phone down, my hands steady. That chapter was closed. Weeks passed. I finalized the sale of the Beacon Street property. Half of the funds donated to the Willowbrook Literacy Foundation, just as Eleanor would have wanted. The rest I kept for the future she had urged me to build. That future took shape in a small town far from the weight of Boston's stone buildings. Willowbrook with its single stoplight, its diner with chipped mugs, its streets lined with tall pines. There on Main Street, I found a forgotten storefront with peeling paint and dust-coated windows. I cupped my hands against the glass and saw possibility. With the inheritance, I purchased the building. Grace helped me scrape paint and sand floors. Slowly, the space transformed. Warm, honey-colored walls replaced the gray, mismatched chairs, filled the corners, and shelves rose to hold books again. I named it the Hearth, a place where warmth could gather. Opening day was quiet. A hand-lettered sign in the window, a bell above the door that chimed gently when the first customer entered. An older woman with knitting needles poking from her bag ordered tea and sat by the window. A college student came in for coffee, eyes bleary but grateful. A father brought his daughter for pastries, her laughter filling the air like music. I moved behind the counter with flour on my sleeves and music humming softly from an old radio. For the first time in years, I felt completely present, not surviving, living. One evening near closing, a young woman came in with mascara streaked from tears. She stood hesitating by the door until I handed her a slice of apple pie, Eleanor's recipe. She sat quietly staring at the plate before taking a small bite. Her shoulders eased. When she looked up, our eyes met. She did not need to explain, and I did not need to ask. Recognition passed between us like a silent promise. Moments like that became the rhythm of the hearth. Stories unfolded over steaming mugs and half-eaten muffins. Lost joy, heartbreak, beginnings. In their company, I stitched myself back together piece by piece. One afternoon, I found a small drawing taped to the counter, a child's sketch of the shop with two stick figures smiling inside. Underneath were the words, "This place feels safe." I pinned it to the wall near the register, a reminder of what Eleanor had left me. Not just assets, a chance to create safety where once I had known only silence. Sometimes at night, when the lights were low and the last customer had gone, I would sit by the window with a cup of tea and think of Eleanor. Her words still echoed. Not a reward, but a key. Build a life that belongs only to you. I realized then that I had done just that. The final twist came not with drama, but with peace. Ethan never called again. His silence no longer haunted me. Instead, it freed me. The only voice I carried forward was my own. On the first anniversary of the hearth grace, and I lit a candle on the counter. Customers gathered, sipping tea, sharing laughter. I looked around and felt something bloom inside me. It was not a triumph. It belonged. My name is Rachel Carter. Not someone's ex-wife, not the shadow of a broken marriage. I am the woman who took rubble and built warmth. And this life, this quiet, steady fire is mine. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the left.